Okay, so it's 12 o'clock. I want to be really respectful of our speaker's time and everyone's time. But my name is Anson Koshi. I'm here on behalf of the McGovern Center, and I'm really excited to introduce our final speaker for the 23-24 Artists and Resilience Speaker Series. So this is Preetika Rajgariah. She's a multidisciplinary artist whose work examines intersections of cultural identity, nostalgia, and capitalist consumption, all while referencing her traditional upbringing as an Indian-born American. She received her MFA from the University of Illinois and currently lives and works in Houston. Her work has been shown locally, nationally, internationally, and I really was blown away by her most recent exhibition. I think it's her most recent one, but one from last fall, where actually one of the New York Times writers, Faria Roisin, wrote a really beautiful essay about Preetika's work. The exhibition was called Between Frustration and Fulfillment. So I wanted to just read a little bit of what Faria wrote. And so this is her words, not mine. So she shares that Rajgaria's journey through art has been discursive, but has brought her exactly to this point of resolution. She embarked on a journey of finding herself in the center, and her work, Between Frustration and Fulfillment, is a reflection of that. Roisin describes Rajgaria's work as generous, hungry, gnawing, and challenging. She goes on to share that Rajgaria is asking questions about her current place in order to understand and conceive her future. And this exhibition is a beautiful and satisfying play on that very reality. So I will turn it over to Preetika, and we will take questions at the end. So feel free, if you have any questions, just place them in the chat and we'll tackle those at the very end. So the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Anson. Um, I'm really excited to be here with you all today. Um, I will be transparent about the fact that like talking to the black hole of the internet makes me a little nervous and self-conscious at times. So I'm going to try to do the best I can without my laugh track in the background. So my name is Preetika, and I've been living and working as an artist professionally, I guess, since about 2010. And today I wanted to, like Anson just started off with words from Fariha, so I'm just like, oh wow, I can't believe I have to follow those up. That was an amazing collaboration we had. But I'm gonna time travel you back a little bit to how the work has progressed and where I have kind of stabilized and found my footing today over the past few years. But I did want to take you on a little journey because I think it's kind of fun visually to see and really interesting. So I also want to acknowledge that I'm probably speaking to like medical school professionals or people in that field, which is a field that I pursued until my end of my sophomore year in undergrad. So like I was very much on track for kind of in those spaces and conversations for a very long time. So even being reached out to do this is like, oh wow, it feels nice and it feels familiar in a way that I'm enjoying. So let's get started with I'm gonna go ahead and plug y'all into this presentation that I made. And okay, here we go. Play. Okay. There's a picture of my hands. This is, I want to take y'all back, like I said. So before I started doing the work that I'm doing today, there was a long, before getting to like art history about it, but back in the day when I was making work in undergrad and such, and in my early days of making, I I very consciously removed my identity from my work. And I think that that is something interesting to note. I My interest has always mostly been in painting and drawing, so I come from that painting background. And when I did all that major change and graduated from school, I taught for a couple of years after that because I didn't really know what it meant to be a contemporary artist. I grew up in a home and a culture that doesn't really professionalize or show avenues for, or I wasn't really exposed to like what that meant. So I started to go to artist residencies, which I this from 2010 to 2015, I made, again, like I said, I removed my identity from the work and I focused on mark making. And these are all watercolors on like large scrolls of paper. This was a show actually that showed in 2015 at Art League Houston, which is local. But I've always been interested in people and how they occupy space and place. And um, I think about, and I love color, and so like I'm going through these quickly because again it's just really interesting to see where it all kind of started. And again, these are watercolors on paper, and after after all of these mark making, I did that for a number of years. And then after that, I moved from Texas to Illinois, and I went to graduate school at UIUC, which is 2 hours south of Chicago. And it was a really formative period for it was like a turn in my practice that's very significant because for the first time, I wasn't living in Texas. Um, I went to undergrad in San Antonio, so I was still in Texas, and I was confronted with the lack of diversity in other places. To be quite honest, I was shocked that I was in this small town in Illinois, that um, I was starting to get a lot of feedback and questions about like my identity and culture, and we weren't talking about the art, we were just talking about like all those other things, and that was very frustrating. But it made me aware that oh, I do have a story that like not everyone just like knows about, because in Houston, you're with, as you occupy space in Houston, no matter where you go, you hear kind of, different languages and different people. And I don't know, I kind of took it as granted, I guess. And I started making pieces that really foregrounded how I felt about, or how kind of questions about how I was navigating identity. And and I also revisited uh, fabric and textile and sari. I was using these materials in my undergrad, but again, no one was really responding. And so I don't know, as a young adult, I maybe was like, okay, well, never mind. And I, put that away. So I was like, okay, let me revisit some of these things that I had been holding on to for a while. This is one of my grandmother's saris that I burned I used a welding tool to burn out parts of it. It's called What We Keep, What We Leave. Another small textile piece. So, and then I took textile off of the wall. This is more like this is into 2018. And I started making these like kind of obviously human-esque shapes or forms, imagining queerness, imagining what like aunties meant to me, what like women felt like, what these kind of energies. And I think that I was really in the space of again, if we think about like the politics of the time, 2016 to 2018, that, oh God, that was a rough time for all of us. But I all of these forms are made out of saris and sari pieces that have been stiffened, and they're hollow and they kind of like float in space. And some of them they're transparent in places, so like light comes in and out through them, and they have all this adornment. And so again, really pulling from like cultural cues and narratives, and just kind of world building. I think I just started like really plugging into imagination and world building and thinking about yeah, growing up and what it felt like and what I wanted it to feel like, and maybe what I dreamed it could feel like, and maybe what it feels like for other people right now. These are all the musings that I have. But this is 2018. I Here the aunties again. That's what I called them. These like soft-bodied figures. In the back, there's a mural with a bunch of dots, and this piece was called Dot Not Feather because that's something I was asked a lot in elementary school here in Houston when I told people asked me what I was, and I would tell them I was Indian, and they were like, "Oh, dot or feather?" And it was like it was a whole thing all the time. So, um, it's definitely dot. And then on the left of the image, this is a video of a performance. But I wanted to show through these works, A, I'm using a lot of textile, B, I'm using my body in different ways, and all of that is going to come back around in a different way. In 2018, I reconfigured these soft-bodied sculptures into these amorphous shapes for a show called I Ain't Sorry. And this was actually in Lawndale Art Center in Houston. So um, it was really fun to kind of reconstruct. I think that I really enjoy like we have to think, I think, as artists of like the artwork not becoming like on a pedestal and not sometimes becoming like this pinnacle of thing that cannot be then uh created or refound. Or anyways, that's what I think about recycling and reusing, and things like eating themselves and spitting out another thing a lot in my practice. So the soft bodies ate themselves and turned into these shapes and sculptures on the wall. I also did a show shortly after that. This show is again at Art League in a different space that was all about um, hair and the beauty standards that women have, especially women of color, how they participate in this system of like this underground hair network, basically, that's like that profits off of uh women of color. Like I found out that a lot of like wigs and weave and uses a lot of donations from the South Asian or Southeast region of Asia for hair. And so like I was fascinated. This is also when I shaved my head in 2018 for a performative piece, which in this show plays in the background. But I again am starting to think about like which bodies are using what and who is the money going to, like where's the profit. Bodies like mine are not profiting by giving their hair away, right? Like, and then the people that buy the weave and stuff are not profiting. It's these like billion-dollar beauty industries that profit off of our backs for what? Like for a standard that is ridiculous to begin with, right? Straight silky hair. And I wanted to bring up this show to you guys just to so you can understand that I've had like an interest in commodity and how capitalism takes a thing and kind of like reworks it for its own benefit. So this was a show in 2018. And again, you've probably noticed like the painting has kind of left the arena for a bit. So you started with Faria and now I'm entered. This is one of my favorite books. And I think that like all industries really should engage with it. I think there's something for everyone in this book. So we're gonna, there's a quote in here that I think leads my practice a lot. It took me a long time to accept that a person can only ever meet you how deeply they meet themselves. And oh, so good. So that's Fariha, who Anson spoke about earlier, or who wrote about my work last fall. This book, I imagined I'm about to get into the yoga related work. So I imagine this would be kind of like a book that's centered around uh, wellness, obviously, and health, coming at it from a space of like yoga and other industries. But it blew me out of the water because it's actually much broader than that. And it's told kind of through a narrative lens. So you have like some story, her story coming in as a survivor is pretty much what it is foregrounded with. But talking about wellness from the eyes of a survivor is very different. And she gets global, she gets really micro as well. So I think it's a fascinating novel and or book, not novel. Um, and it is on audiobook. So that's how I do all my bookings, because I work while I listen. So this book was really a momentous moment. And anytime anyone comes to my studio, I'm like, here, you got to read this book. So um, this is an image. So this is let's talk yoga a little bit. I grew up doing yoga in this park with my uncle in India. Whenever we would go visit, this is in New Delhi. Uh, when I started doing yoga here in the States, I was, in my probably, well, in the state when it had kind of like a rise in the early 2000s, I think ish. It felt really different and it didn't feel like the image here. Um, and so I remember kind of being turned off by it and being like, oh, this is like something that I really used to have all these like really good memories and experiences with this like engagement and being with my body, and now it feels like really weird and I don't want to be in these spaces where they're saying all the names wrong and they're like telling me how to, it just didn't feel like the same. And um very specifically, the spaces are often very like white centered, a lot of like able-bodied white women, and then me being like the one brown chick is kind, and then it being yoga, which is, originates in India and is like tied to Hinduism too. It just felt really strange. And so again, this is like another arena where capitalism has come in, and this is not a new thing, but you know, with the waves of how kind of globalization works and stuff, I decided to do a show in 2019 at Women in Their Work, and I wanted, and it kind of started with this performance, but I collected almost 100 mats that were donated by community people, by studios. So they're all used mats. I always get my mats secondhand, and this was the collection of them. And I had everyone stack these mats on my body uh, to literally feel like weight and what that implies, all the different things that it implies. Um, and I was wearing in space, I was mic'd up, and so there were speakers, so my breathing was in the space as well during the course of this like 30-minute performance. And here's just another view. And then I emerged at the end of the performance through all those mats. And this is how we set up space for after the performance during the run of the show. There is a swastik symbol that was reappropriated by the Nazis. So this is the auspicious symbol from Hinduism that originated, that I just placed the mats in that kind of like arrangement. There are ceramic hands coming out of this pile to take place of the body that couldn't be there during the run of the show. This was another piece in the show in which I had collected all these ads that were constantly on my phone, that were all yoga related, but I cut out the bodies to kind of allude to an erasure of South Asian people from this whole industrial complex that I found baffling. So these were all cut with a little X-Acto because I'm a little bit of a masochist, which I'm sure a lot of you can relate to in your own ways. I collected all of those bodies and I put them in this little vessel in this image. And that piece is called Posers. And then there in the background, there's another video, a 3-channel video installation that was part of that show. I wanted to I had to go through that show to tell you guys that I had collected all these mats in 2019. And then I moved into a studio space, and from all this time I had like stopped making those little mark making paintings, and I hadn't painted. Like all these works that I've kind of showed you have been like labor in different ways and like making in different ways, and I really missed painting. So it kind of like made itself clear that, oh, I mean, these paintings, these yoga mats, which I now had so many of, and I was like, well, I can't just like, well, what am I going to do with all of these? Well, oh, this became a surface because it has like a grid like structure to it, or it has a woven like quality, or it has a cloth like flexibility. And so as someone who grew up painting all the time and working on paper or canvas or whatever, I was like, oh, this might work. Let's try some things. So when I would Google brown people doing yoga, I would get stock images like this. This was in 2019. So this was one of the first images that I was like, oh, well, that looks like what I used to do in the park, like, but a little, a little upgraded. And so I decided to make this image because this is the only image that I, found and captivating. And I started here. So this was the first matte painting I ever made. And the mats that the figures are seated on are where there is some collaged fabric, sari fabric that I, again, had been collecting for a number of years and just dragging around with me. This piece now lives in a home, so that's very exciting. I just wanted to show that this was collected by a family member, so I'm very excited that it has a home and is not in storage. And then what happened was, I'll go back to that. So these are this is a shot of some of the fabrics I'm using now. I started by we have to get to the insertion of my body in the work. And that happens because I didn't like any of the images on Google that were stock images of brown people doing yoga. I was like, this is ridiculous. B, COVID happened. So let's go here and then I'll go back. So COVID happens in March and everything locks down. We all have PTSD from that in different ways. And I had a day job throughout, working in a optometry office at the time. And it's important because I, like many of you, was still going to work all throughout COVID, and was also like freaking out about my life and my life ending. Like, this is pre-vaccine, like watching all the news, still having to go to work, like masked up, gloved up, all of that stuff. And like every day coming back to just, holding that anxiety and thinking like, holy shit, this is going to kill us. Like, we're all going to die, thinking about that all the time. And so, I started to think, well, since there's not any exciting images of other people doing yoga, or I need to put brown bodies back on the mat. And what other body that I can use but like my own body, as someone who who is always like, um, who grew up in a time when there was like no representation of, uh, and there still isn't, but no representation of South Asian people in any spaces like media spaces or anything like that. It was all very like separate. Like, yeah, I grew up with Bollywood, but that was very over here. And that was very specific and had its own um inner tanglings and things, like its own problematics of colorism and things like that. And then you have like in America, you're trying to in the 90s, I'm trying to assimilate and forget my culture and like be done with it, you know, like that was very much the vibe in the 90s, like um not trying to bring attention to it or not try, you know, all of that. um Anyways, ooh, I just went like on a mental journey. So COVID freaked me out, and I realized that I, as someone who is not gonna have children, I was like, I should probably think about my legacy as an artist and what is that going to um what is that going to look like when I'm gone in these art? If I make self portraits, then that's a way of self preservation and leaving something behind that I have agency over. In art history, most of the time women were painted by men, and they really did not have any agency over the way they were represented. So I was like, well, I want to paint myself. Because of all these numbers of reasons. And also I hadn't painted in a very long time. So during this is this was made in May of 2020, but I would just like have these photo shoots, these creative shoots with myself and my life just to be representative of 2020 after I was gone. So I think that these matte paintings came out of this like collision of a lot of specific and timely things. Um, COVID, art history and representation, the moment that we were at, and like also realizing that I was making collage self portraits in 2004 and no one gave a shit. And I was like, I'm going to get back to it and I'm going to put these brown baddies back on this mat and I'm going to speak to all these different things, whatever interests me in this language of painting and collage and material. Um, these again, this is an example of some of the fabric, which most I get from, I have tubs from my mom and like her armoire of things that she doesn't like anymore that I take, or like aunties in town. But I have started to source directly from India too, if I can. So this was like the last batch that I got, which is very, very exciting. This was a piece. You remember that textile piece from one of the earlier slides? This is that piece in the background, the teal kind of swooping piece where I had cut out. So I started also inserting my own work into my own work, which is very like art history nod. And I just wanted to show, I've actually never shown inspo shots with the painting, but for maybe more like, I wanted you to like see how one thing got to the other. This piece now lives in the Houston Endowment Building. That's me. We had a very cheeky shoot that day. But yeah, she has a home too, which is very exciting. This plant I found during a walk in 2020, like all these are all these 2020 works that were all very formative at the beginning. And this like flower was so cool. I forgot what it's called, but I used it a few times. And that's the painting that came out of that image. So this like queerness of plants, I really enjoy like bringing all these elements into the work, all these kind of identities and markers and symbolisms. And I'm not going to talk it to death, but I like to also hybridize other images that I have, like these image of bindis that I had, and kind of like collage them together. And then you also have the fun interplay of the pattern that was already on the mat with the moon cycle in this piece, which I really love. Um, this is another beginnings of a piece that turned into that. Spread the light, be the lighthouse. This is my first solo of matte paintings that I had in 21. This is that plant again. That it kind of like started as this big elephant ear type thing, and then it, as it died, it kind of turned in on itself and turned into this very phallic structure. And I'm going to talk about my titles too, because they sound so smart and amazing, and I just want you to know that where they come from, because I think it's funny. This was another piece in that same solo. This is another piece from that solo too. I'm zooming in just to show you the texture of the fabric and the mat, because they do have such a great interplay in real life, and it's hard to communicate that over a screen. These are where my titles come from, which is like so exciting to me, because um, I like to find humor in the work, and so this is a place where I get a lot of joy. There's a lot of play that happens in my work that is kind of just for me, and I'd like to, I think that, yeah, this is obviously just another example of like finding an area where like capitalism is doing its thing and I get to reappropriate it and use it for my benefit. So I'm like, oh, okay, those are great. All these like quotes and things are great. And they all come from these. I'm an avid tea drinker. So it's like, oh, what a great place to put that. So most of my titles come from here. So I'm not responsible for making those like very Rumi-esque titles come to life. This was beginning of 2023. I took my work to Mexico City for Material Fair, which was really exciting because I had a solo booth for the first time at a fair, and I was showing internationally. And I was like thinking about culturally being in that global south, and how I actually wanted to make work about what guardians and temple deities felt like. And so I wanted to recreate those figures in these column-like pieces and with my body, and just how that felt in a place that is situated like Mexico City. It was really, really awesome, and it felt really powerful. These are I called them the warriors, definitely playing on like the pose names as well. And again, just a zoomed in detail kind of the labor and the handwork that goes into the collage element of the work. That's the piece in the center. This is actually a redone composition of a queer love scene from a TV show. That was a South Asian TV show. I think it's yeah, anyways. So I like to recreate things a lot because of the fact that I just never saw it growing up. So I make work for my like younger self, I think, to imagine what it would be like if, if I did grow up in the day seeing like an artist that, expanded my mind. It might not have not taken me like so many years to get to where I'm at now, but that's neither here nor there. Um, in last year, I was asked to. Oh, I never said anything about the solitaire piece. Nature does not hurry, yet everything is accomplished is the title of this one. This was my mood at the end of 2022, and I made this piece in 23 as well, because I was tired and exhausted, and I felt like I was unraveling. And I played a lot of solitaire growing up, and that's that. In last year, I was asked to make a piece for the Rice tents, the tents that are at Rice, and the shape of the tent is this like Hershey kiss shape. And I was like so excited that I got to kind of take my practice out of the rectangles. And this was my first public art commission that I had ever gotten. So I was like, woo, milestone. And this is how the piece started. I was at in Arkansas when I made this piece at Crystal Bridges. Oh, and I just noticed myself in the computer too. Huh, funny. Um, this is how the piece developed. And this after like getting the collage elements on there and kind of figuring out the color scheme. And here are some detail images of the figures and the paint. And this is where she lives now. And your potential self is infinite. I really wanted, this was for these kids on this college campus. Like I really wanted to convey that message through a visual. And this is up until like July, I think. So really, if you're around Houston or it's drive buyable, and so you don't even have to get out of your car, but it is amazing and incredible to walk, to approach these figures that are way larger than life. I had never experienced my body at this scale, and it was really powerful for me. And I hope that it was powerful for the students as well, as they kind of walk and meander these spaces where they are probably like feeling boxed in or like sometimes enclosed, and I just want them to feel free, and I want them to feel like they can do anything because they really can, and I don't want them to feel limited like I felt limited a lot. So I wanted to convey all of that. And for anyone that watches reality TV, I am unashamed, and this background is from Love Island. So do with that as you will. I am constantly taking yoga mat donations year round, all the time. If you have a mat in any condition, I will be able to use it. So there's my Instagram on top and my email. Note that down, and I'm sure, and you can reach out to me. I'm wrapping it up here. I wanted to share what I have upcoming. I'm in a really exciting group show that's opening in Atlanta next week, and I've never shown art in Atlanta or been to Atlanta, so I'm very excited. Oh, the visual here is a new painting that no one's seen yet, so you guys are the first to see this little baby painting. And she doesn't have a title yet. I'm between two titles, so you'll have to wait to see. But after Atlanta, I'm going to Expo in Chicago, and this piece will be there. And then I'll be in upstate New York kind of through May, and at an artist residency there, making work and experimenting and playing and continuing this process of construction and deconstruction of the self, because that's what I think my life's mission right now is, just kind of this learning and unlearning of all the things. I started with a book, and so and this is a plug, this is my last slide. I am a huge audiobook nerd. These are some of the books that I have read over the past couple years. And I can just geek out about audiobooks and probably all of these. I just started, well, first of all, braiding sweetgrass for people that are in the sciences. I just highly, highly recommend, because I think it's written by Robin Wall Kilmer, and she's not only like a scientific researcher, but also an Indigenous woman. And so she braids literally those stories and data together in this like really amazing way. Um, and then Entangled Life, I just started the one about mushrooms, and I'm already, after the intro, I was like, whoa, this is gonna be big. So I love those. And then of course, Art Monsters is an incredible look inside radical feminist art. And I am just astounded by these examples of these women artists that don't get any kind of like people don't know who they are because they're women, and we don't teach them, and so I've started to really self I mean, yeah, teach yourself about the women artists that come before you and are still, that have made the pathways for us to be doing what we're doing today. And then I also love novels. Dream Builders was beautiful, and The Skin in Its Girl is a queer Palestinian story, and that's also really lovely. So I think that that is the end of my presentation. Uh, and I was in a lot of places, so I appreciate your patience as you went on that journey with me. Thank you.
Awesome. That was really incredibly amazing to hear. I did not know about you kind of pursuing a career in medicine, so that's just kind of fascinating in and of itself. But I'm curious, I have a quick question. We have a lot of trainees on the webinar today, and artists, you're such a great example of this, that artists really access vulnerability and really can, and the things you talked about were, to me, very vulnerable. And kind of how do, because I feel like in medicine, we struggle with this. Like, I think that's why we have the humanities, because we're trying to constantly tap into that vulnerability. But there's like a set population of like physicians in training who are wired for this. And then there's a lot that I think aren't leaning into the humanities. So do you have any advice, kind of like, how did you get to kind of access all of this? Because you're so kind of just very open about your work, and it's beautiful to see, but I'm sure it took time to get there in some way.
Oh yeah. I mean, I feel like I've already lived a few lifetimes in this body. Um, I I came from a family that never forced me to be in medicine. We don't have any doctors in the family, or we didn't at the time. My brother actually went into med school after I quit. He was like, "Oh, okay, cool. I can like go do that thing that I wasn't doing because you were doing it." So that was funny. But it's not like so I always did art as a hobby, and I think that the problem is that if you don't see yourself doing a thing, you sometimes you cannot imagine it. I wasn't able to imagine myself occupying this space of all these artists that we learned about or whatever. I took art all the way through from it was always my elective of choice. I I played a lot of sports too, so that's kind of like where I grew up doing art and athleticism basically in different ways, and so that a lot of my performance work, which I didn't really touch on today, and a lot of my body work comes out of that. I think that I think a lot about the crossover between like the two fields of like science and arts, and like the two where they overlap, because I was like, I was doing all of that for so long. Like I studied my ass off for so long and then just like washed my hands of it. And there was a lot of like guilt and shame and all of that that I had for years after. And I remember my dad, when I changed majors, he was like, if you're not doing med school because it's hard, then you better know that being an artist is going to be a lot harder. And I was like, whoa, well, that's not why I'm not doing it. I'm doing it because I'm unhappy. Um, and I just didn't realize that um well, let me go back because I've started to meander, but I think that the fields share a thing in common, and I think that big thing is problem solving. And I think that as like doctors and medical professional people, you like get a problem and you like find out how to solve it, and I do the same thing but in a visual way. Like making a painting is not just like sitting on a hill and looking and like, it's problem solving, and it changes a lot on the way, and it becomes making decisions and then sitting with those decisions, and then every time you make a move on a painting, it's like chess.
Mhm.
It talks back to you, and so you have to like maneuver that. And that's not just painting, it's also like all the material works that you've seen from other artists too, is like no matter what material you're working with, I think that there's this like problem solving thing, this way of like digging deeper. Like I think that my interest right now is really like, how can I get to know myself, and how can I be kind of like the best person I can be, and I use my work as a way to like figure all that out.
Mm.
And like I think that a lot of my work is just a meditation, to be quite honest. Like painting is a meditation, repetitive movements and actions are meditations for me. And I don't know if I answered the question, but
Oh yeah, no, you totally did. And this
okay.
idea of like creativity too, like you have to be creative in the problem solving, and that ties to
Mhm.
both. So that makes a lot of sense.
It really does.
So we have a question from one of my colleagues, Dr. Ray. She's asking, have you had to come to terms with anything from your childhood, culture, etc., to complete your art? You don't have to be specific. I don't want to pry. Just know art can sometimes bring up realizations for people that can help their work or their art.
Oh, I don't quite understand the question, I think.
Yeah. I think she's just trying to figure out if like through like becoming so creative as you are as an artist, are there things you are processing perhaps from your upbringing or culture? And I think some of that is visible in your work, but perhaps you could expand on that.
Okay,
And she's
okay.
just asking, you don't have to share anything too
Oh,
personal.
yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, thanks. That was nice. I think that yes, there's so much that we process as artists, right? And I think that our field as artists allows for that, though I have to say that time is really like messed up now because everyone assumes that things are like move faster than they do. But I I think that like processing is where other departments and industries are lacking because you don't have the time to sit with the world and yourself. I think taking the time to sit with yourself, which is kind of like all I do while I have periods of like ingesting things like books and podcasts and music, and then I have periods of like total silence where I love working in silence. And I just sit with my thoughts, and that opens up, like being bored opens up portals. Like when you just sit in stillness, which is what people, especially women, are not allotted or have the freedom or ability to do these days. Like when you're able to just sit, things come up, portals open up in your mind, in your brain, in your body. Like I truly believe that um, everyone should have an avenue for healing. To me, it's art making. It's like tactile. I love material. You saw it, kind of this huge material um, variety in my works today. But like whether that's um, so that's how I answer that. But I think everyone should have their own, not should is a bad word, but everyone, I hope, has a, a place where they can process, whether it's the treadmill or walking your dog or, yeah.
Yeah, that's really kind of a cool parallel because I feel like here in the humanities, part of what we do is create space for people to process. And that idea you have about slowing down, like it's such a
Hmm.
hard thing to find in medicine. So that really does resonate, I'm sure, with a lot of our audience. I have some other questions. One from Lawndale. How cool is that?
Oh,
How did it feel to shift from a focus on mark making and abstraction towards figurative, especially the self as subject? Scary, freeing?
mm, um, that's a good question. It was a big shift, and I would say it was a coming back to self in a bigger picture because you didn't see the work before the mark making, which again was like is not um relevant. But coming back to myself has been where um like I literally used to be like, well, I don't want to play the race card, so I'm not going to identify myself. Like I fully erased myself from the act of making. And I think partially because that is what was like allowed for at the time. And that was what people were responding to at the time. Now, I, as an artist, also know how to make beautiful things. that is my gift. Like that is what has been in me since I was a kid. Um, Bringing beauty into the world, I think, is part of the role of an artist. So whether that beauty comes in the form of these marks, that was also meditation for me. I did feel very great making those pieces. I still like enjoy making those pieces, and I love watercolor and those kinds of mediums because of my long history with those pieces and that body of work. But then coming back to my body quite literally, I think comes from a more specific place of self-acceptance and finding beauty in the self when I was told my whole life that I was not beautiful or accepted in any of these spaces that I occupied. So in all these brown spaces I occupied, I didn't have the right features. I was dark. All these things that marginalized people are like told about themselves because of white supremacy, all of that, holding all of that, I the self-acceptance part is also where these self-portraits started very intentionally. Like, okay, I am going to take pictures of myself and like be okay with what I see in that reflection because I have to. I'm not just gonna like be sad and I think like also, so I hope that makes sense, but
Mhm.
it's just freedom in a different kind of way, right? And I also use all the skills that I've gotten from all these different bodies of work. Like I still use them and I grow that skill set. And that part is just really exciting to me too.
Yeah, it's really cool in the kind of narrative you created, how you're using a lot of these same elements, and now you're just the centerpiece of that, which is really beautiful. So it kind of mirrors that idea of self-acceptance.
Yeah, there's just too much erasure. Like it's just not okay to like see all these things about from the things we're eating and consuming, turmeric, haldi, all these like weird golden milk lattes and things like that, to the ghee on the shelf that my mom used to make on the stove, to the yoga mats, and like no brown bodies are represented in any of these wellness spaces. So like that really pisses me off. So there's a lot of like, um, that is me putting the body back. Like that's crucial. And queerness is something um, I fully live like a queer lifestyle that is um, very non-traditional, and have just now started to have like a reparative relationship with my family over the past year or so, or 2 years. And that has been yeah, I have, that feedback is like the best feedback to me too, because like I didn't grow up with any kind of role models, and when I became role model age, which is like what I am now, I guess, I was like, oh wow, like this is so cool. Young people are coming up to me saying that like, all the things that I think, like, anyways,
Yeah,
it's
that's
it's
amazing.
amazing.
Yeah, that's really amazing.
Role model age is real.
Yeah. The life goal. I think we have one last question. It's from our director here at the McGovern Center, Dr. Carlin. He shares, you had a lot of interesting observations about gender, race, culture, and art. I'm curious if you have thoughts about ageism in art. To what extent have you some, to what extent have some of the feminist artists represented older bodies in positive ways?
Ooh, I love this question so much. Um, I Ageism is so real, and with social media, it really has made it even worse. I have made a concerted effort to stay off of social media during this, like, well, just in general, and it's really been much better for my mental health as I become not like the next best thing that like all the art world and the medias are trying to like grab onto, and that whole cycle. You have to kind of realize that, and through all these artists that are like, these women artists are still being shown for the first time or getting their first museum show. I was just listening like when they're in their 70s and 80s and stuff, and it's like, wow, I was listening to a talk that was about Alice Neal, the portrait painter,
Mhm.
and it was just like, incredible that she just painted portraits like her whole life, and people during the age of minimalism where people were just like, oh, portraiture, that's so like lame. And the fact that we're back to it now, you know, it has a there's cycles in art, and the thing is there's cycles because of um all these other whatever. The thing is that I think that you just have to be honest with your work, and you have to just like keep making it. It's inspiring to hear about older women artists that are like still making the work that they believe wholeheartedly in, because the public will catch up. And honestly, it's like whether or not they do, it's not even like about them. So I think part of it is also asking yourself like why you do the work that you do. And again, for me, I really I have to remember that I make the work that I do to work on myself. And so it's a never ending process. And I think that artists are constantly putting themselves in the body, like good artists, in my opinion, are always learning and like perpetual students. My dad always said that like he was a perpetual student, and that's something, even though he was like in the tech world, that's something that has always stuck with me a lot, that kind of approach to like life and making. And I feel like I've gotten really Buddhist about my practice and just like life right now. So I think, I don't know, I move a lot at like a slower pace, and I feel like I'm at a really good point in my practice where I'm taking in the right things, I'm learning from um, the right people. I have an open mind. I have like a really good balance and routine and structure that I'm like happy that I've established over the last so many years. And it takes time to get there. And I think time is when you're filling out applications and you've like, you know, it's like age 18 to 26, 28 to 35, 38 to 45. You know, when you start getting like further and further on the tick box, which has started happening to me, and then also being like aged out of certain opportunities, like, oh, you have to be 35 or younger to apply for this. It's like, oh, okay, cool. Next.
Yeah.
That's not for me. um, there's just a lot as far as the ageism thing that I have to come to terms with. And um, you know, sometimes it's a good day and sometimes it's a bad day. And that I welcome that cycle too, because it's real.
That's wonderful. I mean, I love that you reference Alice Neal. I think she's such a great example of that, how she was so ahead of her time, but she just kept at it. That's such a great point.
Yeah, the Art Monsters book, for anyone interested in like women and feminism and art, is, again, I do all of my books on audiobook because I make while I do them, and I can't even read anymore. It's just embarrassing and true. Um, but that Art Monsters book is excellent. And then there's another book called like The History of Art Without Men by Katie Hessel. And a lot of these, I think she has a podcast too. So there's a lot of like women centered artists and like sources for like information that are centered around queer and women artists that are really great and empowering and uplifting, and it makes you want to keep going.
Yeah. Well, you've inspired us. I feel like I need to add a book list now for all of our speakers because
Oh, I know. I was like,
that was
I've
quite
thought
the
about
list.
doing that because I just like I have never
Awesome.
read more than I have right now in my life. It's like, wow, audiobooks really. I'm a plug for I should be like a library advocate for the Libby app.
Well, this has been really amazing. Thank you so much for sharing your time, your work, everything about your story. I want to be very respectful of everybody's time. So I can't imagine a better way to wrap up our academic year of this series. So thank you, Preetika. We'll be sure to share what you've shared with us on our website. So if anyone wants to kind
Perfect.
of connect with you, get your email, we'll make sure they have it. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Please feel free to reach out. It was a pleasure today. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. We'll see you next time.